Hello humans! I'm going to show you a quick and dirty way to put a picture on any surface using Photoshop CC's Vanishing Point filter. That'll take about, I don't know how many minutes. Anyway, then if you stick around, I'll add almost everything else you can do with Vanishing Point, and there's quite a lot. So let's get going. I'm Doc Badwrench, and thanks for joining me. Let's evade life's casual cruelty for just a moment and work with Vanishing Point. I won't dwell on minutia, and I'll be moving pretty fast, so don't be afraid to pause if you need to. In the description for this video, you'll find a link to the exercise files. Use those or follow along with your own images, or just watch. So open up your files if you got them. I have this high-resolution image of a hallway and then a painting I plan to stick on the wall. Select the painting image from among the open files. Now copy it to the clipboard so you can paste it within the Vanishing Point filter. But there's a catch. You can't just select a layer and copy it. You need to select the pixels in the layer by first selecting all with Ctrl-A. Then copy that to the clipboard with Ctrl-C. Now click the tab for the open hallway image. Here it is on a single layer. If you were to enter the Vanishing Point filter while you had this layer selected, then any work you did would be applied directly to that layer. This is Photoshop, so we're not doing that. Create a new empty layer by either clicking this button or pressing Ctrl-Shift-N and name it Fast. Now, select the filter menu and then select Vanishing Point or press Alt-Ctrl-V. And now slide the window edge in a bit so you can still see the Layers panel. You can clearly see that the empty layer is selected, so all your work will not affect the image below. So here's the preview window. Now create your first plane. Quick and dirty, remember? Press C to activate the Create a Plane tool. Now draw out 3 separate planes. Use the surrounding picture elements as your plane guide. Note that some planes will change color depending on how out of perspective they are. In order for a plane surface to be usable, it must be blue. If your plane isn't blue, you need to keep adjusting until it is. Now you should have 3 somewhat acceptable perspective grids. The more time you spend making the grids look square, the better your artwork will look. Now Ctrl-V to paste the image into Vanishing Point. It will appear in the upper left-hand corner of the preview window. Once you click and drag the image, it will snap into any angled surfaces you move the mouse over. Now you can manipulate it with the Transform tool. Press T to activate that. With this, you can resize proportionally. Hold Shift and drag. Rotate and move. Fit it into an area and then click on OK, and there you go. You stuck a painting of my grandpappy on that wall, and since the pasting happened on an empty layer, you can hide and unhide it or apply effects and styles. Good for you. And that's the end of the quick and dirty lesson, Beginner Cat. But if you want to dig really deep, then stick with me. You'll know almost everything by the end of this. Back in Photoshop, hide the fast layer with Ctrl-, or clicking here, and create a new empty layer. Name this one Wall Cat, then re-enter Vanishing Point. Let me break down all the parts of this window. First, here's the preview window. This is where all the work happens. Next is the toolbox, basically your primary collection of tools. This is the Options pane, which changes based upon the tool you're using. This tiny icon here is the menu. This contains a stable of secondary tools, no less useful, though they're tucked away. Lastly, here's the zoom options, which I'm pretty sure I've never actually used because the keyboard shortcuts are second nature at this point, but it's there if you need it. So that's the main interface. Next, you're going to delete those planes you placed back when there was no regard for slop. When you open Vanishing Point, all those planes are selected by default. Now press the backspace key and they disappear. Your undo history works in here, by the way. You can undo, step backward, and step forward from inside the filter, same as you're used to anywhere else in Photoshop. Now let's get acquainted with your essential navigation tools. For those who are new, you'll actually use these tools throughout Photoshop, so it's best to learn them now. Press Z to activate the zoom tool and then click to zoom in and Alt-click to zoom out. Press H to activate the hand tool. This allows you to pan around an image. Alternatively, while using any tool, you can simply hold spacebar and then click and drag the mouse to move around the image area. Now that you've established a navigational foundation, take another crack at those planes. Press C to activate the Create a Plane tool. Now, draw out a floor plane by setting points. But where you rushed through it last time, this time take care to be more precise. This is where the zoom, hand, and backspace keys are really going to help out. Align your plane along the primary hallway area and map out a square using the pillar protrusions as a useful alignment tool. Be precise, but don't try to manually fill the whole hallway. As with before, note how the plane changes as you draw and adjust the points. If you're working with an image with a lot of pixels, it's helpful to adjust the grid size to be larger so that it's easier to see the underlying picture. Remember, you're eyeballing for a grid size that seems to match the grade and slopes and angles. Now that you have your plane, press V to activate the Edit Plane tool. Now, go to this handle and drag it downward to capture as much of the hallway as possible. And if your edges don't line up perfectly now that you've slid that out, then click and drag the corners to get it just right. It's important to establish a base plane with as much precision as possible because it'll make drawing out the remaining planes that much easier. So now that you have this nice full hallway length floor plane, next draw out the first wall plane here on the left side. Activate the Create Plane tool, but instead of manually drawing out the next plane, you're going to grab this handle and slide your point out. Now you have a second plane aligned with the left wall. It's possible that when you slide out your second plane that it doesn't quite match the angles of your image. That's okay, because you can adjust the points on this new plane, though you're now unable to adjust any points connected with your original plane, or you may just delete that plane and readjust the base plane. Also, you can use the angle value in the options to adjust the plane this way. This kind of manual control can be quite useful. Now, build out the remaining planes, pulling on those handles to sweep over the angles in your scene. Do the other wall, then the ceiling. Finally, drag down this handle to include the doors at the end of the hallway. Then extend your planes where necessary to comprise the entire length of the hallway. And that's it. With your hallway built, you'll now paste as you did before. Once again, the picture is in the upper left-hand corner, and the moment you drag it away, it snaps into place in the perspective grid. Depending on the peculiarities of your grid, you might have a huge painting like I do. Enter transform mode and reduce the size. Hold Shift as you drag the corners to constrain the proportions. Now, drag the painting around. As you drag, notice that it moves over the sharp angles thanks to your detailed plane building. This is something that's only possible when your planes are properly connected, unlike those in the earlier instructions. As evidence of this, notice when you drag the picture over this spot, it doesn't hug the corner like the others. That's because this plane isn't actually connected to the adjoining plane, it just ends here. Now, before you commit all of this, make sure the artwork you pasted is in the size and position you desire. Once again, activate transform mode, and now you can put the final touches on the size of the painting. Remember to hold Shift as you drag. Up at the options, note that you can flip and flop the artwork if that's needed. Now, click OK and commit both the perspective grid and the pasted picture. Something to remember about anything you paste this way: no matter what it was, like an image, text field, or smart object, Vanishing Point smushes it into a single flattened bitmap. No exceptions. Anyway, outside Vanishing Point, you now have the painting on a separate layer that you can apply effects to or other blending options. So visit the menu, then select Layer, Layer Style, then Drop Shadow. Check that out. Thanks to your Vanishing Point work, Photoshop already knows what direction the shadow should face. So all you have to do is make any additional adjustments you want, such as reducing the distance of the shadow, and then the picture rests nicely on the wall. Voila! Hallway sufficiently classed up. Reflect upon your success for exactly 1 second. Now let's review. To recap the toolbox so far, this is the Create Plane tool. It's how you draw out your planes. The Edit Plane tool lets you manipulate said planes. This is your Hand tool. That lets you pan around. And the Zoom tool allows you to zoom in and out. Next, you learned about the Transform tool, which only becomes active after there's a suitable thing to transform. And now we're going to keep going. Back in Photoshop, hide the wall cat layer, create yet another new layer, name this one Marquee, and then re-enter the Vanishing Point filter. Now it's time to learn about the remaining tools as well as the secondary menu. First, there's the Marquee tool. Press M to activate it. This allows you to make rectangular selections, but perspective adjusted along your planes. Then you can duplicate the contents of the marquee or replace the marquee with pixels from elsewhere in the image. Relevant to this tool are 2 types of key presses you might not be familiar with. When you duplicate, you'll Alt drag from inside the marquee. This means you'll hold the Alt key down, then click and drag the mouse. When you replace, you'll Control drag from inside the marquee. Like the last, just hold the Control key, then click and drag the mouse. So duplicate something. Draw a box around this leftmost wall light. Now place the pointer inside the marquee area and Alt drag to the left. You've now duplicated that light onto the empty layer. Now replace the light on the other side. Using this same marquee tool, you're going to draw a square around the right wall light. Now, place the pointer inside the marquee area and Control drag to the right. This will replace the contents of the marquee with nearby pixels. As you can see, the replacement pixels don't exactly meld with the surrounding area, but you can fix that. So undo, and now go to the Options menu and change Heal from off to on. And now, again, Control drag and... well, that's not right. Wait a minute. That behaved like the Alt drag. I knew this task would fail and I had you do it anyway. I hope you've learned something from this. No, actually I did this to illustrate something tricky about this tool. When using the marquee's default replace functionality, your action must immediately follow the creation of the marquee. As you saw, when you undo to try this again, the function fails. But if you want to have really good control over a marquee replacement, you need to use this tool differently. So step backward a few times until the marquee selection disappears. Confirm that Heal is on, then draw out the marquee again. Now change the move mode from Destination to Source. Now you don't even need to hold a modifier key down, you can just click and drag around until you find the best pixel sampling you can. And because you turned Heal on, the replaced contents blend better with the surrounding area. Incidentally, you might have noticed the luminance option within the heal dropdown. When you opt for that form of healing, Photoshop tries to match your pixels with the apparent lighting of the scene. And now, the last marquee option you need to know about is opacity, and this should be familiar to most of you. You turn the opacity down to 50%, execute something, and note that the pixels are half as intense. Now, press OK again and commit the changes to the filter and the layer. Now hide the marquee layer and create yet another layer. Go ahead and name this one Stamp. And with the layer selected, re-enter Vanishing Point. Now, the Stamp tool lets you paint an area with the pixels from another area. For instance, I don't like the shifty look of this light. Get rid of it for me. Press S to activate the Stamp tool. Now place your mouse pointer over the large area of the empty wall next to it. Now Alt-click on it. The area is now stored in memory. As with any brush, use the bracket keys to increase or decrease the size of the stamp. And adjust the hardness to add or remove opacity from the outer edges. For this exercise, turn hardness up to 90. Now, paint over the light fixture. Note that you can see where Photoshop is sampling from. And the moment you release the mouse button, boom, Photoshop has replaced and healed the area pretty darn well. If you're not happy with the results, refine this further. Also, this works best for smooth areas, as discernible objects and shapes will display odd artifacting and unwanted visual noise more often than not. The next two tools are sort of a package deal. The Eyedropper tool is used to select a single pixel's color. Press I to activate it. Then click on this color here. That color is now used by the Brush tool. Press B to activate that, so that you can paint with it onto any plane. This is a very precise tool that requires some painting expertise to use well. Modify your brush settings by typing directly into the value fields. Diameter 500, hardness 30, opacity 80, and heal is already set to on. Now click, hold, and paint over this area with large strokes. Now if you zoom in and then step backward, you can see the difference. We've blended away much of the stucco. Don't be afraid to experiment either, and don't forget that you can make modifications to the layer after the fact and gain even more options. Lastly, you can also manually set the color of the brush with the color picker found at the far right of the brush options. The Measure tool lets you measure and define distances in an image. To understand this tool, let's dive in. Press R to activate it. Immediately, planes in their grids appear in green as your pointer crosses over each plane. Now, click and drag the width of this hallway from wall to wall as shown. You can manually adjust the points of this line if you didn't get it right when you first dragged it out. An alternative method for selecting a distance is by double-clicking on a plane's edge. Do that for the floor plane's vertical length. Double-click here. Photoshop automatically places a measurement the whole length of the hallway. Note that there are properties for each ruler. Photoshop's taken a hilariously bad guess at how long the hall is. Fortunately, you can steer it closer to reality. Click on the ruler for the hall's width. Change the value to 10 feet or 3 meters. Photoshop will automatically change any other rulers so that they conform with your measurement. This is particularly useful when you're working with pictures of any place where you can get exact measurements. Or you can just guess, like we did. And to make this even more useful, click the box for Link Measurements to Grid. This adjusts the grid to the new measurements you created and feels a bit more proper in my experience, though I cannot tell you exactly how. But why would you care about any of this? Well, if you're working in Photoshop's 3D mode, it can be quite helpful, as your scene would likely fit the proportions of other elements set to the same scale. But another reason is that you can pass this information to other applications via file exporting. We're going to learn about that stuff right now. Click on OK. You know the drill. Hide the stamp layer and create a new layer. Name this one Menu. And with that layer selected, re-enter Vanishing Point. Now to examine this tiny, unassuming little box that's simply called the menu. First, you have two standard toggles. One for showing and hiding the grids. The other is for showing and hiding any rulers. The next three are all about sending data back to the main Photoshop environment. Render Grids to Photoshop will take your entire perspective grid and flatten it onto the active Photoshop layer. Click that. See? Now undo and return to Vanishing Point. Render Measurements to Photoshop does the same thing, but for any measurement rulers you drew out. Now click that. Now undo and return to Vanishing Point. Last in the set of three is Render 3D Layer to Photoshop. It takes all those planes and measurement information and creates a scene on a 3D layer in Photoshop. After you select that, press OK. Now Photoshop prompts you to create a new 3D scene. All of the values are pre-populated with the information you created and measured in the image. So as you can see, we now have a 3D hallway that can be manipulated if you're conversant in that editing mode. That is way outside the scope of this video though. So hide that layer, select the menu layer, and re-enter Vanishing Point. Now the next set of three is also about rendering 3D layers, but this time to other programs that make use of that info. You don't need to execute these, just know that it'll allow you to export a file. DXF is a standard set by AutoCAD, and 3ds is a standard set by Autodesk. Finally, VPE is particular to Photoshop and interacts specifically with After Effects. I'll export this to demonstrate later. Hang around after the acknowledgements if you want to see what that's all about. Important note about generating any 3D data. In order for any of this to work, you need to have one big perspective grid with multiple connected planes. If you have more than one continuously connected perspective grid, the 3D data will be an unusable mess. The last two menu functions here are grayed out. Why is that? Because you aren't using an editing tool. Once you activate the Marquee, Stamp, or Brush tools, then those two will become highlighted and you can toggle each. By default, both are turned on. There's a very easy way to understand what these do. First, select your brush tool. Now hold down the right bracket key for a second if your brush isn't already max size. Now remember how textures and brushes will wrap through corners like this? Well, when you turn off Allow Multi-Surface Operations, it's not possible to cross over the neighboring plane. Brushes, stamps, and any pasted textures are stopped at the edge. And if you'd like something to continue unnaturally past that edge, then also turn off Clip Operations to surface edges. Now you can see the brush weirdly extending past the border. And that, my friends, is that. I hope you've enjoyed some learning. That hallway picture is by Binyamin Melish and can be found at Pexels. My thanks to the kind souls at the Adobe forums, as well as Luminous Works, the Seattle-based training facility. For those of you who use After Effects, I'll explain how to use Vanishing Point export files right now. Open up After Effects. Select File, Import, Vanishing Point. You'll see that you have a single composition in a folder containing a bunch of textures. Double-click and open up the composition. Congratulations! You have a hallway suitable for a mid-1950s comic book villain. For whatever reason, when you open up these files, the 3D orientation is always screwy. Still, you can clearly see that there are 5 textures comprising all of the interior walls and the distant doorway. Each of the planes comprising those surfaces are parented, so all you need to do is modify the parent layer. You're going to twirl down the parent layer, then twirl down Transform. Now find this Z rotation and start fussing with the degree value until you align the hallway with the apparent ground plane. It's definitely finicky, and I'm not going to worry about being exact. Now, with your current time indicator set to 0, create a position keyframe. Now, drag the indicator over to 5 or 6 seconds and add another keyframe. Now click on the Z field and type like -10,000. Actually, -15,000. Now, go ahead and preview the animation. Pretty cool, considering how little work you did. Now, as you approach the end of the hallway, there are many fewer pixels informing the textures. So if you wanted to, you could open those textures in Photoshop and add that detail by hand. So there you have it, humans. Just about everything there is to know about Vanishing Point. If you still have any questions, leave them in the comments. Also, like and subscribe because we're all shills. Until the next time, always remember.
Birth is a curse and existence is a prison.
It sure is, Michael. It sure is.